There's something almost magical about a dream when it first appears in your mind. It's quiet, it's fragile, but it's alive. It doesn't need approval. It doesn't need validation. It simply exists, and in that moment, it belongs entirely to you. But then something happens. You feel the urge to speak it. You want to tell someone. A friend, a family member, maybe even the world, because it feels exciting, because it feels real, because you think that by saying it out loud, you're bringing it closer to life. But what if I told you that the moment you speak your dream too early, you begin to kill it? Not because your dream isn't powerful enough, but because the world you release it into isn't ready for it. You see, dreams are like seeds, and seeds don't grow in the open air. They grow in the dark. They grow underground, away from noise, away from judgment, away from interruption. The moment you expose a seed before it has roots, it dies. And that's exactly what happens when you speak your dreams too soon. Because when you speak them, you invite opinions. You invite doubt. You invite people, well-meaning or not, who will project their fears onto your vision. And suddenly, what once felt clear starts to feel uncertain. What once felt possible starts to feel unrealistic. What once felt like your path now feels like something you have to defend. And that's exhausting. You haven't even started the journey, and already you're explaining yourself. Already you're justifying your dream. Already you're defending something that hasn't even had the chance to grow. And slowly, quietly, that dream begins to fade. Not because you stopped believing in it, but because you started listening to everything else. There's a reason why some of the most successful people you admire didn't talk much in the beginning. It wasn't because they didn't have dreams. It's because they understood something most people don't. They understood that silence is not weakness. Silence is protection. Silence is focus. Silence is power. When you keep your dream to yourself, something incredible happens. You stop performing. You stop seeking approval. You stop needing validation. And instead you start building. You start working when nobody is watching. You start failing quietly, learning quietly, improving quietly. And that quiet, that silence becomes your greatest advantage. Because while everyone else is talking, you are doing. While everyone else is announcing, you are becoming. While everyone else is seeking applause, you are creating something real. And here's the truth most people don't want to hear. Talking about your dreams gives you a false sense of progress. You feel good. You feel accomplished. You feel like you've already taken a step forward. But you haven't. You've only taken a step outward, not forward. Because progress doesn't come from talking. Progress comes from action, from discipline, from consistency, from doing the things no one wants to do over and over again, without recognition, without applause, without immediate results. And that kind of work requires silence. It requires the ability to sit with your own thoughts, to face your own doubts, to confront your own fears without running to someone else for reassurance. Because the moment you depend on others to believe in your dream, you lose control of it. And dreams that depend on external belief don't last. They collapse the moment they're challenged. They disappear the moment they're questioned. They fade the moment they're doubted. But a dream that grows in silence, a dream that is built through action, a dream that is strengthened through struggle, that dream becomes unshakable because it's not based on words, it's based on proof. And proof is something no one can argue with. You don't need to convince people when you have results. You don't need to explain yourself when your work speaks for you. You don't need to announce your dream when you become it. But here's where most people go wrong. They confuse sharing with commitment. They think that by telling others, they're holding themselves accountable. But in reality, they're doing the opposite. They're releasing the pressure. They're satisfying the emotional reward without doing the work. Because when people praise your idea, when they say, "That's amazing," your brain reacts as if you've already achieved something. And in that moment, the urgency disappears, the hunger disappears, the drive disappears. Because you've already received the reward without earning it. And that's dangerous because dreams don't die from failure. They die from comfort. They die from distraction. They die from the illusion of progress. And nothing creates that illusion faster than talking. So the question becomes, can you stay silent long enough to build something real? Can you resist the urge to explain yourself? Can you hold your vision close even when no one else understands it? Because that's where the real work begins. Not in the spotlight, not in the announcement, but in the silence, in the early mornings when no one is watching, in the late nights when no one is clapping, in the moments when it would be easier to quit, but you choose to continue. That's where dreams are built. And it's not glamorous. It's not exciting. It's not something you can post or share or celebrate. It's hard. It's lonely. It's uncertain, but it's real. And reality is what separates those who talk from those who achieve. You don't need everyone to understand your dream. In fact, it's better if they don't. Because when no one understands it, you stop trying to explain it. And when you stop trying to explain it, you start focusing on executing it, and execution is everything. Ideas are everywhere. Dreams are everywhere. But execution, that's rare, because execution requires sacrifice. It requires discipline. It requires showing up again and again without immediate reward. And most people won't do that. They'll talk, they'll plan, they'll imagine, but they won't execute. And that's why most dreams never become reality. Not because they weren't good enough, but because they were spoken too soon and acted on too late. So protect your dream, guard it. Not because it's weak, but because it's valuable. Not everyone deserves access to it. Not everyone will understand it. Not everyone will support it. And that's okay, because this isn't about them. It was never about them. It's about you. It's about what you're willing to do when no one is watching. It's about how far you're willing to go without recognition. It's about whether you can trust yourself enough to keep going even in silence, because one day if you do it right, you won't have to say a word. People will see it. They'll see the results. They'll see the growth. They'll see the transformation. And they'll ask you, how did you do it? And you'll realize you never needed to tell them in the beginning, because the ending speaks louder than anything you could have said. So the next time you feel the urge to announce your dream, pause, ask yourself, do I want attention or do I want results? Because you can have one or the other, but rarely both at the same time. And if you choose results, then choose silence. Let your actions speak. Let your discipline speak. Let your consistency speak. Because in the end, the most powerful thing you can do is not to tell the world what you're going to become, but to show them when it's already done. Self-mastery is louder than self-promotion. The strongest message you can send to the world is not what you say, but who you become. Discipline thrives in secrecy, while distraction thrives in exposure. And most people never realize this because they are too busy being seen instead of becoming. They wake up and the first thing they think about is not progress, it's visibility. Not growth, but recognition. Not mastery, but attention. They want the world to notice them before they've built something worth noticing. And that's where everything starts to fall apart. Because self-promotion without self-mastery is noise. It's empty. It's fragile. It's something that can impress people for a moment, but it cannot sustain anything meaningful over time. You can say the right words. You can post the right images. You can create the illusion of progress. But illusions don't hold weight. They don't survive pressure. They don't endure difficulty. And the moment life tests you, the moment things get hard, the moment you're required to perform, not just speak, that illusion collapses because there is nothing underneath it. But when you focus on self-mastery, everything changes, because self-mastery is not about being seen. It's about being built. It's about doing the work that no one applauds. It's about facing yourself, your weaknesses, your excuses, your limitations, and choosing to improve anyway. It's about controlling your habits when no one is watching. It's about staying consistent when there is no reward. It's about showing up, especially when you don't feel like it. And that kind of work, that kind of discipline, it doesn't need an audience. In fact, it requires the absence of one, because discipline and exposure cannot coexist for long. The moment you expose your process too much, you interrupt it. You start thinking about how things look instead of how they actually are. You start performing the work instead of doing the work. You start choosing actions that are visible instead of actions that are necessary. And slowly, without even realizing it, your focus shifts. From mastery to maintenance of an image. From growth to validation. From internal progress to external approval. And that shift is dangerous. Because once you start chasing validation, discipline becomes optional. You only do what gets attention. You only continue when people are watching. You only push forward when there is recognition waiting on the other side. And the moment that recognition disappears, so does your effort. So does your consistency. So does your commitment. Because it was never rooted in discipline. It was rooted in exposure. And exposure is unpredictable. It comes and goes. It depends on people, trends, timing. It's not something you control. But discipline is different. Discipline is internal. It doesn't care about trends. It doesn't depend on applause. It doesn't require motivation. It is built on decisions, repeated decisions, difficult decisions. The kind of decisions that no one sees, but everyone feels the results of later. And those decisions are made in silence, away from distractions, away from opinions, away from the constant noise that pulls your attention in 100 different directions. Because attention is your most valuable resource, and exposure drains it. Every time you put yourself out there prematurely, every time you check for reactions, every time you wait for validation, you are giving away your focus, piece by piece, until there's nothing left for the actual work. And without focus, discipline cannot survive. Because discipline requires depth. It requires sustained effort. It requires the ability to stay locked in on something long enough to improve. And improvement doesn't happen in bursts of attention. It happens in long periods of uninterrupted effort. But we live in a world that rewards interruption, a world that celebrates visibility, a world that encourages you to show everything before it's ready. And that's why so many people struggle to build anything meaningful, because they are constantly pulled out of the process. They start something, then they share it. They make a little progress, then they announce it. They get a small result, then they celebrate it publicly. And every time they do that, they break their momentum. They reset their focus. They weaken their discipline. Because discipline is not built in moments of excitement. It's built in moments of repetition, in doing the same thing over and over again, even when it feels boring, even when it feels slow, even when it feels like nothing is happening. That's where real growth happens. Not in the highlight, but in the routine. Not in the announcement, but in the execution. And execution doesn't need to be seen. In fact, the less it is seen, the stronger it becomes. Because when no one is watching, you remove the pressure to impress. You remove the need to perform. You remove the temptation to take shortcuts. And what's left is the truth. The real work. The honest effort. The unfiltered version of your progress. And that's where mastery is built. Because mastery requires honesty. It requires you to see where you are without distortion. To acknowledge your weaknesses without denial. To push yourself without distraction. And you cannot do that if you are constantly focused on how things appear. Because appearance is deceptive. It allows you to hide behind progress instead of creating it. It allows you to present an image instead of building a foundation. And foundations are built in silence. They are built slowly, carefully, deliberately, layer by layer, without urgency, without pressure, without the need to prove anything to anyone. And that's why they last. Because they are real. Because they are tested. Because they are not dependent on external factors. They are built from within. And anything built from within cannot be easily shaken. But anything built for the outside world can collapse at any moment. Because it was never designed to withstand pressure. It was designed to attract attention. And attention is not strength. Attention is not stability. Attention is not growth. It is temporary. It is fleeting. It is something that comes and goes without warning. And if your progress depends on it, you will always be unstable. You will always be inconsistent. You will always be chasing something that you cannot control. But when your progress is rooted in discipline, everything changes. Because discipline doesn't fluctuate. It doesn't depend on how you feel. It doesn't depend on what others think. It is something you choose every single day. And that choice, repeated over time, becomes identity. You don't just act disciplined. You become disciplined. And when discipline becomes who you are, not just what you do, you no longer need to prove anything. Because your actions speak for you. Your consistency speaks for you. Your results speak for you, and they speak louder than any words ever could. Because words can be doubted, but results cannot. Results are evidence. They are proof of effort, proof of commitment, proof of discipline, and proof eliminates the need for explanation. You don't have to tell people who you are when your work shows them. You don't have to announce your progress when it is visible in your actions. You don't have to promote yourself when your results demand attention. And that's the difference between those who chase exposure and those who build mastery. One group is always talking, always sharing, always seeking validation, but rarely moving forward. The other group is quiet, focused, consistent, and slowly, steadily they are building something real, something that doesn't need to be explained, something that doesn't need to be defended, something that doesn't need constant attention to survive, because it was built in silence, strengthened in discipline, and protected from distraction. And when it finally reaches the surface, when it becomes visible, it doesn't need hype, it doesn't need promotion, it doesn't need noise, because it carries weight, because it has depth, because it is backed by years of unseen effort, uncelebrated work, unnoticed progress, and that kind of work always speaks for itself. Not loudly, not instantly, but undeniably. Because when something is real, people feel it, they recognize it, they respect it. Even if they don't understand how it was built. And that's the power of self-mastery. It removes the need for self-promotion. It replaces words with results. It replaces noise with substance. It replaces attention seeking with value creation. And value is what lasts. Not attention, not trends. Not temporary recognition, but value, something real, something useful, something that impacts others without needing to announce itself. And that kind of impact can only come from discipline, from consistency, from the willingness to stay in the process long after the excitement fades, long after the motivation disappears, long after the attention moves on to something else. Because that's when the real work begins. When it's no longer interesting, when it's no longer new, when it's just you and the routine, you and the repetition, you and the decision to continue even when nothing is pushing you to do so. And most people won't stay there. They'll leave. They'll get distracted. They'll chase something else that feels more exciting, more visible, more rewarding in the moment. But those who stay, Those who commit, those who embrace the silence instead of running from it, they become different, stronger, sharper, more focused, because they are not influenced by noise. They are not distracted by exposure. They are not dependent on validation. They are grounded in discipline. And that foundation allows them to build something that others cannot. Something that lasts, something that grows, something that continues to evolve even when no one is watching. Because it was never about being seen. It was always about becoming. And becoming requires time. It requires patience. It requires the ability to delay recognition in exchange for growth. And that is one of the hardest things to do in a world that rewards immediacy. A world that tells you to share everything, to show everything, to document everything. But not everything needs to be seen. Not everything needs to be shared. Some things are meant to be built in private, protected, refined, strengthened away from the eyes of others. Because the more you expose something too early, the more vulnerable it becomes. To judgment, to doubt, to distraction. And those things can slow you down. They can pull you off track. They can make you question something that was once clear. And clarity is essential for discipline. Because without clarity, you hesitate. You second guess. You lose direction. But when you protect your process, when you keep it contained, when you focus only on the work, clarity strengthens. Direction becomes sharper, and discipline becomes easier to maintain. Because there is nothing pulling you away, nothing competing for your attention, nothing interfering with your progress, just you and the work. And that's where the real transformation happens, not in what you say, but in what you do repeatedly, consistently, quietly, until one day you look back and realize you've become someone different. Not because you told the world who you were going to be, but because you had the discipline to become it in silence.